collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, we'll discuss the prospects for Cyprus reunification after the failure of the talks in Switzerland.
Tell me in one way, just one way, that Russia has ever tried to help to solve the Cyprus problem. It's impossible. It hasn't.
We'll hear about the COSME programme, fostering competitiveness in Europe's small and medium-sized enterprises.
We have actually so far helped 94,000 companies with a volume of 3 billion euros.
And we talk to a Bulgarian banker who is successfully implementing the COSME programme.
It was a new idea and we were among the pioneers on the market, but it was a very successful idea. The companies understood the benefits and simply there is a clear demand from the companies now for such an instrument.
High hopes for a solution to the Cyprus problem were pretty well dashed earlier this week when the two leaders returned from Montpellier in Switzerland saying that the talks had stalled. We weren't told initially exactly why they had stalled, and although the statement from the UN has been perhaps a little more terse than usual and not really speaking up about possibilities to carry on, there is the possibility that things could be salvaged. We're going to be talking now to James Kerr Lindsey. He is Senior Visiting Fellow at the London School of Economics and has spent years studying not only the Cyprus problem, but the politics of the region in general. James, what did you make of this final fall at the last fence, it seemed?
Well, like everyone else, I felt profound disappointment at the news. I think, like a lot of other people, I'd got my hopes up high that we were on the verge of some major breakthrough. But, having said that, I'm not altogether despondent. Yes, I think I'd hoped for some sort of significant announcement to come out of the meetings in Switzerland. It didn't happen, but all I can hope is that, on reflection, the two leaders will really sort of think about what the consequences of failing to reach an agreement this time really means. And I, like many others, are in no doubt at all, if this process collapses, if this is it, then there will not be another chance to reunite Cyprus. We'll be talking another 5 years. Who knows what will happen in elections in the Republic? Who knows what will happen in elections in the North? It could be a very, very long time by the time we have two more leaders who are in sync again in this way. And I think by that point, the facts on the ground will have changed so much, and it'll make, any sort of reunification unrealistic. So all I can hope is that the two leaders will really go back and think about this and find a way of restarting the talks.
You didn't mention either Turkey or Greece when you spoke just now. Now let's look at the interference, if you like. Certainly a lot of people consider it interference by Tsipras in Greece. Greece has traditionally sort of said, whatever you decide to do on the Greek Cypriot side, we'll support you. And then he came out and in the end they wasted, I think, a day talking about this, saying that he wouldn't have the multi-party meeting unless this, that and the other. And then we also have the Turkish situation, and they have made it fairly plain that if there isn't an agreement, they would seriously consider annexing the north, and therefore the Green Line would become a border with a Turkish province. So do talk me through what you think all of that means.
I'll start with Turkey. I think, this is the party, if you like, to the overall Cyprus problem, where most attention has been given. I have to say that viewed from outside, and I have really must emphasise that this seems to be an almost universal view amongst people that I'm speaking to, feel that Turkey is actually on board for trying to reach a Cyprus solution at this time. That Erdogan has no personal investment in Cyprus, unlike someone like Bülent Ecevit who ordered the invasion in 1974. Erdogan doesn't really care that much about Cyprus. I think he'd be quite happy to give it up. So really the feeling is this old view that it's all about Turkey can solve it tomorrow is a bit of a smokescreen for a fact that really this is a much more Cypriot process than I think we've ever seen before. That said, and it may sort of sound like, rather paradoxical, but I think many of us sort of in our own minds understand it with the way that Turkey is going. If there isn't a Cyprus solution, yes, I think there is a very good prospect that the government in Turkey, that Erdogan, will just simply say, look, I prefer to see Cyprus solved, but obviously if that's not going to happen, I've had enough of this problem. It's a nuisance. It's been weighing down Turkey for far too long. I'm just going to solve it another way and annex the north. And, I think we have to bear in mind that we saw what happened with Russia and Crimea a few years ago. There was enormous sort of outcry internationally, a wringing of hands in the West, but essentially things have calmed down. We're saying to Russia, look, that was very, very bad. You shouldn't have done it, but let's look at how we can normalise relations. And I have to say that I think Erdogan is probably making the same calculation, saying, look, there will be a short-term hit to it. It'll kill off any hopes of EU membership, but let's face it, those are dead anyway. So I think that maybe he is sort of thinking that, look, I'll give this one final go, but if it doesn't work, then we'll just solve it in this way. So I think that this is something, again, that both Greek and Turkish Cypriots should be pondering on. For the Turkish Cypriots, if they don't find a way of getting a deal with the Greek Cypriots, they will be lumbered as a province of Turkey, and a province of a Turkey that's going in a very, very worrying direction. I think many Turkish Cypriots see this, and actually I think that drives the motivation for a solution amongst many Turkish Cypriots. But what's interesting is that it doesn't seem to have really got through to the Greek Cypriots. The old idea of the status quo, they've got to throw this out of the window. It doesn't apply anymore. If they fail to reach a solution this time, it could very realistically lead to partition, and that will be a partition with a Turkey that's going in a very dangerous direction. And I hope that Greek Cypriots really take this on board, that this is a real opportunity to break that link with Turkey and build a new Cyprus state with the Turkish Cypriots, who are also very nervous about Turkey. The Greek angle is also incredibly interesting in all of this. I think there's two schools of thought that seem to be on why did Greece suddenly get involved like it did, because as you pointed out, this is very, very unusual. This doesn't tend to happen. I think one of the arguments could be that, you've got a very, very active foreign minister in Greece who has a very strong knowledge of the Cyprus problem, is known to be very opposed to the guarantees. So maybe he just got ahead of himself and decided that, he was going to make this statement of, long-standing Greek policy, which in many ways reflects Nicosia's wish, thinking that somehow this was going to help the process. And of course, it didn't. There's another school of thought, which is more conspiratorial, but I certainly wouldn't necessarily dismiss it, which is to say that given that Greece doesn't tend to act without the say-so of Nicosia, was this some sort of spoiling tactic for whatever reason to try and delay the talks? Some have even hinted, and again, not beyond the realms of possibility, that Russia might have been.
Well, I was going to ask you about that.
So it's a very, very interesting question, what's happening here.
I was going to ask you about the Russian connection, because the Greek foreign minister is, I think, well documented as being very sympathetic, or has been in the past, to Russia. And we've had the ambassador in Nicosia, Russian ambassador, saying that, of course, if there is a multi-party conference, Russia should be involved. Russia isn't even a guarantor power. Why should it be involved? There seem to be an awful lot of other fingers trying to stir up the pie, James.
Absolutely, and I have to say, I look at the way that Russia behaves, and I have to say that, and I've asked many Greek Cypriots over the years, and I've never actually had a convincing answer. Tell me in one way, just one way, that Russia has ever tried to help to solve the Cyprus problem. It's impossible. It hasn't. It's never lifted a finger. It's never put its hand in its pocket to fund bi-communal activities. It's never used its influence on Turkey when relations were very good, and there have been periods of exceptionally good relations between Moscow and Ankara. Russian government have never, ever done anything to try and solve the Cyprus problem. And I think there's a very good argument to say that even now it does not want to solve the Cyprus problem. It lives in fear that if Cyprus is resolved, then maybe Cyprus will join NATO, that it will lose its influence. Far better to have Cyprus divided and play on the fact that it can be, the Greek Cypriot protector in the Security Council and make the most of it. So, I take a very, very sceptical view of Russian involvement in the Cyprus problem. And, like many others, deeply concerned about some of the signals that we've had, that the Russian ambassador seems to be cavorting, I'm going to use that word, with hardline opposition parties that we know stand against the Cyprus solution. What is that about? So I think this is something that is very worrying. But then what do you do about it? Do you just try and alienate the Russians altogether and know that they're in a position to be a spoiler because they've got a veto in the Security Council? And remember, they used it in 2004. Or do you somehow try and bring them in and involve them in a process, not necessarily in a direct way like Britain, Greece and Turkey's guarantor powers, but maybe at that second tier, rather like the United States would be, and say, look, OK, you feel you should have a seat at the table. The Greek Cypriot side is almost certainly going to want them to have some sort of involvement. So what is some sort of constructive way that we can do this? And what would they be looking for? But also, let's not make this about, sort of what they get out of it, but what they put into it. Will Russia help to bankroll a Cyprus solution? That's one of the big questions about how a settlement's going to be paid for if it's reached. Well, maybe Russia can help out on that then. If it wants to be so involved, well, it can be involved in the way that other parties are. So, yes, interesting question. Very sceptical about Russia's role, but also understand that, has great potential to be a spoiler. So maybe we need to think about how to involve it in some way.
And then, of course, we have to look at the United States. A new president upcoming in January, and Ban Ki-moon steps down. What effect, if any, do you think that will have, particularly bearing in mind that some of Trump's advisers have been very pro-Turkey? And I think a lot of the hardline parties here in Cyprus, when Trump was elected, thought, good, we need to delay now because he'll be on our side. And it does look actually as if he wants to get cosy with Erdogan and Turkey, and that could really fly up in our face.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the new US administration. I mean, there's all sorts of speculation at the moment. I think many people have obviously treated the prospect of a Donald Trump presidency with absolute horror. But in many ways, one has to remember that a lot of these processes are run by the career diplomats. And so really, in many ways, the key thing to my mind is who is going to be US Secretary of State and who will be, for example, the Victoria Nuland after Trump takes office, and who will play that sort of that bridging role that was played very effectively. So I think that, I wouldn't be at this stage willing to say, look, a Trump presidency is going to have a huge effect on settlement talks if it sort of falls at a rather second level, if you like, in terms, or third level, if not lower, in terms of how the US approaches international affairs. So I think it really is a question of wait and see as to what happens there. But one thing I do think is important to stress in all of this is that, it's very clear that, again, any Cyprus settlement is going to have to find, a way of being paid for. And we can't rely on the United States to fund a solution in the way that, maybe 15, 20 years ago would have been the expectation. Anyone looking at this from Washington is going to say, well, Cyprus is a member of the European Union now. Frankly, Europe's wealthy. It should be paying for a settlement. It's not for US taxpayers to bankroll the reunification of the island. They might help out a little bit, but, I think that needs to be taken on board, that, the US will probably be distancing itself on the financial aspects of a deal.
Which leaves us back where we were earlier this week with the stalled talks and looking at whether or not there is any hope whatsoever of, I think Morphu was the sticking point. What are we talking about here? 1.2% of the land that could scupper the entire deal to reunify the island. And you weren't here in Nicosia at the beginning of the week, James, but on Monday night, literally thousands of Greek and Turkish Cypriots poured into the sports field down by the Lydra Palace in the buffer zone, demanding that serious efforts be made for peace and a united Cyprus. That I don't think we've ever seen before. Do you think it will have any effect at all on the leaders?
Again, I really hope that the two leaders, are taking a deep breath and really thinking about the consequences of this. As you say, there had been a sense that Morphu could be the sticking point. And really, if you break this down, 36% of the island is under Turkish Cypriot control or Turkish occupation, whichever view you want to take on it. The Turkish Cypriots roughly represent 20% of the island. So, there's a great disparity between their population number and the amount of territory they have. That needs to come down, and they need to actually recognise that that's got to come down fairly significantly. The Greek Cypriots have also got to think, well, look, we've got 64% of the island at the moment. Anything more on top of that which gets refugees home or their descendants is a bonus. And I think start to really think this through and not get hung up on the fundamental rights, if you like, attached to return, but really think of this in realistic terms. How many people are going to want to go back? So there's no point sort of saying, well, look, theoretically, we're only going to get 70,000 people back, when in actual fact, in reality, maybe only 50,000 would want to go back and sort of demand, no, we must have a right of return for 90,000, when you're not going to get even close to that. So, it really has got to move beyond this idea of theoretical numbers and try and get a better sense of the actual numbers that will want to go back and to sort of work off those figures, because it really would be tragic if these talks were to collapse and over such a small amount of territory, relatively speaking, and relatively small numbers of people potentially, and see Cyprus permanently divided with a hard border. And let's not kid ourselves, there is a very realistic prospect that is exactly what it will become, a hard militarised border for the sake of this issue. So I really can just hope that, we're not at the end of the road, that this really is about going back, that cool heads will prevail, that the hardliners will be chased off, and that the two leaders will find a way to come back to the table.
We will just have to wait and see. I was talking to James Kerr Lindsey from the London School of Economics earlier this week after the talks in Switzerland broke down.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Kristin Schreiber is Director for COSME programmes at DG GROW at the European Commission. When I met her in Brussels last week, I asked her to explain exactly what the COSME programme was.
COSME is a program for the competitiveness of small and medium-sized enterprises, that's the name. And it runs over a period from 2014 to 2020. And it has an amount available of 2.3 billion euros, so it's a big program. And it has different objectives. It helps SMEs expand cross-border in the EU. It provides access to finance to SMEs. 60% of the program is actually dedicated to financial instruments for SMEs. And there we have basically two types of programs. One is loan guarantees, so that's on the debt side, and the other ones are equity, the equity facility on the equity side. And for the rest of the amount of money, we also foster entrepreneurship and help that companies innovate and find new business models.
How would you say it's changed things for European small and medium-sized enterprises?
I think the big change which happened is that we have companies which would not get any finance otherwise because they have high risk or they're just a startup with no collateral and no security, that they actually can get access to finance through the loan guarantee facility. And if you look at the figures actually until now, I think June this year, we had 93% of the companies have less than 10 employees. So we really target small companies. This is one of the very few programs which provide specific benefit to those companies. And I think another interesting feature is that we specifically help startups. So actually 40% of the companies which got a loan guarantee under the program are startups. That means companies which are less than 3 years old. And I think that's a major achievement because these companies very often have great difficulties in accessing loans because traditional banks don't want to provide them a loan unless there's a guarantee provided.
And of course a lot of those startups are very young people who are a target for the European Union to help in terms of getting them into the market.
Yes, of course, and they also sometimes might be less experienced. They have a great idea and a wonderful business idea, but they don't really know exactly, how you actually talk to a bank, what you have to provide. And there, this help through the guarantee can be really crucial because this helps them to get the loan, which otherwise they wouldn't have got.
How many SMEs do you think have benefited? And is the take-up as good as you would like it to be? I know that in some countries, people think they're aware of what's available in terms of European help, but they're not actually sure how to go about getting it.
No, the take-up has actually been extremely good. So, we actually have more demand than we can satisfy. So we have actually so far helped 94,000 companies, 94,000 SMEs with a volume of 3 billion euros. So it's really a lot of money which could be provided. And of course it depends a little bit. We don't provide this money directly. It goes through financial intermediaries. And you need a proper system in the country, due diligence and check that actually a financial intermediary exists, which can then provide the guarantees to the companies concerned. And that's why we still have a bit uneven figures among member states, but we're slowly getting there. We're now covering almost the whole EU, and we're confident that we will cover, all countries by the end of the program.
What is the hope of DG GROW for the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think our hope is that, we have been successful on startups, and I think we have really done a great job with the loan guarantees and other issues. And what we want to achieve is that Europe becomes an equally attractive place for scale-ups. Because startups, we have the same creation figures now than in the US. But on scale-ups, we're still lagging behind.
So you're talking about businesses that have succeeded in a startup, but they need to grow.
They need to grow, exactly, because, very often you see with startups, they're there, and then after 5 years or so, they disappear, or they remain really, really very small and not really viable. And we don't have that many companies which really manage to evolve into successful SMEs, or even, the famous unicorns about which we talk.
That's a long way down the line. How do the small companies go about putting a foot on that ladder?
Well, by getting effective access to finance. This is, crucial, and that's why, we target particularly the expansion phase, also in the loan guarantee facility. We have the Enterprise Europe network, which, over 600 centres across the EU. It's also, very active in Cyprus. And they basically help companies, advise them how to become more innovative, how to scale, how to find markets in other countries in the EU. And this is really an objective. We hope that through this advising, we can actually achieve a lot over the next 5 or 10 years.
Kristin Schreiber, who's the director in charge of the COSME programme, fostering competitiveness of European SMEs, talking to me in Brussels last week.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Kirill Velichkov is head of European projects at Bank in Bulgaria. He explains how the country has become so successful in funding COSME projects.
Bulgaria was among the countries which started very actively using Jeremy program in 2011. So 5 banks were selected as intermediaries after a public tender on European level with the European Investment Fund. And how did we do it? It was not very easy at the beginning because on one hand the market was much more used to using the European grant program. So you have a project for €100,000 and you get a €50,000 present at the end when you implement the project, so this is the grant, while with the financial instruments in Jeremy you get a much cheaper loan but also with less collaterals. It was not very easy to explain the benefits, but what we were doing was that on one hand we were having a lot of campaigns around the country, meeting with companies, having cooperation with different business associations to promote these new opportunities. We were explaining to the people in a very simple language what is it about. And if I need to explain it now again, with Jeremy, the customers were getting loans with up to 250 bips lower price and with 50% reduced collaterals. And this Jeremy was for free. So when the company needed a loan, they started using it. But it took time. It
was a new idea.
It was a new idea, and we were among the pioneers on the market. But it was a very successful idea. The companies understood the benefits, and simply there is a clear demand from the companies now for such an instrument. This is the good thing, and also it was a capacity building not only for the market but for the banks, because you need to learn also how to implement these instruments as a bank. So it was a learning experience for us as well.
Now, Jeremy was organised by who? Was that a European Commission initiative? Because it's certainly been followed very successfully in your country by COSME.
Yes, it's again with capital from the European Commission, and it was managed by the European Investment Fund, so they organized the tender. So it's to some extent similar with COSME, but there are specifics, because with COSME it's a centralized EU program, while Jeremy is a national EU program.
So Jeremy was the first one, but now that that has, in a sense, been replaced by COSME, it's still very, very successful. Do you find that it's young people who are starting businesses that are more interested in what COSME can offer them?
It's not only young people, it's the different, but it's focused on the smaller companies. It's not for huge companies, because the huge companies usually have access to financing. But if I need to show you, before there was a SIP program, and the continuation of SIP is COSME. And there was a Jeremy program, and the current continuation of Jeremy is called SME Initiative.
So there are lots of possibilities for European businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, to access funding that the banks have, certainly in the past few years, been perhaps a little reluctant to release.
There are a lot of new financial instruments which facilitate the access to finance for small and medium enterprises. And by using these instruments, on one hand, more riskier loans can be financed, but also loans at much better conditions with less collateral, lower price. So the different instruments have their specifics, but for clear, they add value to small and medium enterprises. There are quite a lot of instruments, but COSME is one of the important instruments, one of the successful instruments for me.
I think the problem is that there are, in fact, so many different schemes for so many different solutions that a lot of people take one look and think, I don't understand any of that. Could it be simplified? Should it be simplified?
On one hand, what the Commission is doing in this respect is, for example, this portal Access to Finance, where you can click and see all the different options. What we are doing as a bank, on the other hand, is, we promote the different programs, but when a customer comes to us, we try to give to the customer the right solution. So we know which is the best program and tell the customer, this for the size of the loan you have, for specifics of your company, this program fits you best. So we provide them the solution, and we always tell them it's EU supported.
So that's probably why Cyprus needs intermediaries for these different systems, so that new businesses starting out or businesses trying to expand can go there, get expert advice and a cheaper loan. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.